Hey, good girl. 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 Hey, good girl.
Oh, you didn't know? Your ass better call somebody!
Yo. 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 A little bit later than I wanted to get in here. Thank you for pinning that, Kerr. Thank you. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne. That's what we're going to be reading. This is day one, stream one of it. So if you have never read it, come on in. Now this is going to be one of those technical books. There's going to be a lot of technical terms. Oh, I didn't even turn. There we go. There's going to be a lot of terms that I say wrong. Please bear with me there. Feel free to correct me in chat if you want. Feel free to roll with it if you want. There are some things that, I may stumble into, I may stumble on. If there's a word we just don't know, we'll stop and we'll look it up. It was written in the late 1800s, so some of this stuff may sounded science fiction-y then, but doesn't anymore. Other stuff may be just old-timey enough that we don't know it. Let me silence this. Yeah, get your balls on the track. We're going to be running a half-hour map, and we're just going to run that in repeat. I am not going to do the balls call. Oh, no, I will do the balls call. But what I'm going to do is it's just going to spawn in chat. It's not going to say it's not going to do the volume one. No, I'll leave the volume on there. Whatever. I'll leave the volume on there. Just for people. But I will try to put this up when it's time to play. All right. Now, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea is a sci-fi book. It is mainly centered around a professor and a captain. There are some ancillary characters that play a decent role. I don't remember much of it. I read this book probably maybe not 30 years ago, but probably close to that. I did not see the most recent adaptation of it, but I saw a movie in the 90s, maybe? So some of this is going to be really, really fresh. Really fresh. So get in, guys. Get your balls on the track. I'm going to start the timer now. We're going to do 2-minute timers. Actually, no, I'll do 3-minute timers. 30-minute maps. Here it goes. Timer started. Hopefully we'll get some decent points. All right. Bear with me, guys. Like I said, feel free to correct me if you want on things. Feel free to ask, what does that mean? if there's a word you just don't know, and we'll look up the definition together. My goal, I turned off sound alerts, is because my goal is all of the reading streams are going to be uploaded to our YouTube channel, which is very new. We got only 2 of the 4 reading streams for Treasure Island on there because the other 2 expired before I started the YouTube channel. I have just 24/7 over there too. I think I have like 3 people following me now. So we're pretty big time, you know, just saying, you know, it's kind of a big deal over there, but it's basically a place to store the reading streams. Enjoy the technical jargon. Have a great reading stream. I want to do my own reading, so I'll be deep lurk. Kurt, thank you for the 9 months and the sexy gold heart. Thank you so much. Enjoy the lurk. Yeah, so it's basically a place to store the reading streams so that we can look at them whenever we want, or anybody can find them and look at them. Yeah, if you just want to put on like an audiobook that has random breaks, there you go. Yeah, let's go ahead and get started, guys. I think that was long enough to get everybody in here. Yeah, you got 1 minute left to get in. If you want to type an exclamation point play to get into the marble race, it's going to last about half an hour. So type an exclamation point play. Jules Verne, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Part 1. Chapter 1. A Shifting Reef. The year 1866 was signalized by a remarkable incident, a mysterious and puzzling phenomenon, which doubtless no one has yet forgotten. Not to mention rumors which agitated the maritime population and excited the public mind. Even in the interior of continents, seafaring men were particularly excited. Merchants, common sailors, captains of vessels, skippers, both of Europe and America, naval officers of all countries, and the governments of several states on the 2 continents were deeply interested in the matter. For some time past, vessels had been met by an enormous thing, a long object, spindle-shaped, occasionally phosphorescent, and infinitely larger and more rapid in its movements than a whale. The facts relating to this apparition, entered in various logbooks, agreed in most aspects as to the shape of the object or creature in question, the untiring rapidity of its movements, its surprising power of locomotion, and the peculiar life with which it seemed endowed. If it was a cetacean, it surpassed in size all those hitherto classified in science. Taking into consideration the mean of observations made at divers times, rejecting the timid estimate of those who assigned to this object a length of 200 feet, equally with the exaggerated opinions which set it down as a mile in width and 3 in length, we fairly conclude that this mysterious being surpassed greatly all dimensions admitted by the ichthyologists of the day, if it existed at all. And that it did exist was an undeniable fact, and with that tendency which disposes the human mind in favor of the marvelous, we can understand the excitement produced in the entire world by this supernatural apparition. As to classing it in the list of fables, the idea was out of question. On the 20th of July, 1866, the steamer Governor Higginson of the Calcutta and Bernac Steam Navigation Company had met this moving mass 5 miles off the east coast of Australia. Captain Baker thought at first that he was in the presence of an unknown sandbank. He even prepared to determine its exact position when 2 columns of water, projected by the inexplicable object, shot with a hissing noise 150 feet up into the air. Now, unless the sandbank had been submitted to the intermittent eruption of a geyser, the Governor Higginson had to do neither more nor less than with an aquatic mammal, unknown till then, which threw up from its blowholes columns of water mixed with air and vapor. Similar facts were observed on the 23rd of July in the same year in the Pacific Ocean by the Columbus of the West India and Pacific Steam Navigation Company. But this extraordinary cetaceous creature could transport itself from one place to another with surprising velocity as, in an interval of 3 days, the Governor Higginson and the Columbus had observed it at 2 different points of the chart, separated by a distance of more than 700 nautical leagues. 15 days later, 2,000 miles farther off, the Helvetia of the Compagnie Nationale and the Shannon of the Royal Mail Steamship Company, sailing to windward in that portion of the Atlantic lying between the United States and Europe, respectively signaled the monster to each other in 42 degrees 15 north latitude and 60 degrees 35 west longitude. In these simultaneous observations, they thought themselves justified in estimating the minimum length of the mammal at more than 350 feet, as the Shannon and Helvetia were of smaller dimensions than it, though they measured 300 feet overall. Now, the largest whales, those which frequent those parts of the sea around the Aleutian, Kilimak, and Umgullick Islands, had never exceeded the length of 60 yards, if they attained that. These reports arriving one after the other with fresh observations made on board the transatlantic ship Perrier, a collision which occurred between the Etna of the Inman line and the monster, Eproples Verbal, directed by the officers of the French frigate Normandy. A very accurate survey made by the staff of Commodore Fitzjames on board the Lord Clyde greatly influenced public opinion. Blave Bliss. I'm not sure which line you were in question of. I'm gonna keep going. I'm not sure which line you meant. I'm sorry. Oh, no worries. I'm sorry. The one before the frigate. The Winnie the Pooh is my bomber, my Stream Raiders bomber. Oh, Blave Bliss. Welcome to the party. Thank you for the follow. Come on in and get comfy. Pope? No, Stream Raiders bomber. Is that Winnie the Pooh? At least I'm assuming that's what you mean. Yeah, I'm sorry, Blave Bliss. I'm just going to keep moving on. I'll try to be better about looking at the chat if you need me to reread something. All right. Light-thinking people. Well, here, I'll go back. These reports arriving one after the other, with fresh observations made on board the transatlantic ship Perrier, a collision which occurred between the Etna of the Inman line and the monster, a procès verbal directed by the officers of the French frigate Normandy, a very accurate survey made by the staff of Commodore Fitzjames on board the Lord Clyde, greatly influenced public opinion. Light-thinking people jested upon the phenomena, but grave, practical countries such as England, America, and Germany treated the matter more seriously. In every place of great resort, the monster was the fashion. They sang of it in the cafes, ridiculed it in the papers, and represented it on stage. All kinds of stories were circulated regarding it. They appeared in the papers caricatures of every gigantic and imaginary creature, from the white whale, the terrible Moby Dick of Hyperborean regions, to the immense kraken, whose tentacles could entangle a ship of 500 tons and hurry it into the abyss of the ocean. The legends of ancient times were even resuscitated, and the opinions of Aristotle and Pliny revived, who admitted the existence of these monsters, as well as the Norwegian tales of Bishop Pontoppidan, the accounts of Paul Heged, and last of all, the reports of Mr. Harrington, whose good faith no one could suspect, who affirmed that, being aboard the Castilla in 1857, he had seen this enormous serpent, which had never until that time frequented any other seas but those of the ancient Constitutionel. We'll run the Stream Raiders battle and get another one going. So basically, they're just telling us there's this giant monster that nobody has seen before. Nothing has been cataloged of this. It is now the gossip of the world because of where it's been cited, by who it's been cited. People making light, people making fun, people making serious moves, but all talk surrounding this. And so moving forward, we'll find out what they mean to do about it. Asian Fire, Zuali, and Tall Canadian get the bone eye. We move on to the next chest. Hey Meta, how are you? Alright, so next Stream Raiders is up. Feel free to get in the battle. We'll run that in half an hour. Then birth force, the interminable controversy between the credulous and the incredulous in the societies of savants and the scientific journals. The question of the monster inflamed all minds. Editors of scientific journals, quarreling with believers in the supernatural, spilled seas of ink during this memorable campaign, some even drawing blood, for, from the sea serpent, they came to direct personalities. For 6 months, war was waged within various fortune in the leading articles of the Geographical Institution of Brazil, the Royal Academy of Science in Berlin, the British Association, the Smithsonian Institution of Washington, in the discussions of the Indian archipelago, of the cosmos, of the Abbey Moigno? That's not how we say it, but the Abbey Moigno, we'll say that. In the Mittelungen of Petermann, in the scientific chronicles of the great journals of France and other countries. The cheaper journals replied keenly and with inexhaustible zest. These satirical writers parodied a remark of Linnaeus, quoted by the adversaries of the monsters, maintaining that nature did not make fools, and adjured their contemporaries not to give the lie to nature by admitting the existence of krakens, sea serpents, Moby Dicks, and other lucubrations of delirious sailors. At length, an article in a well-known satirical journal by a favorite contributor, the chief of the staff, settled the monster like Hippolytus, giving it the death blow amidst a universal burst of laughter. Wit had conquered science. During the first months of the year 1867, the question seemed buried, never to revive, when new facts were brought before the public. It was then no longer a scientific problem to be solved, but a real danger seriously to be avoided. The question took quite another shape. The monster became a small islet, a rock, a reef, but a reef of indefinite and shifting proportions. On the 5th of March, 1867, the Moravian of the Montreal Ocean Company, finding herself during the night in 27 degrees 30 latitude and 72 degrees 15 longitude, struck on her starboard quarter a rock, marked in no chart for that part of the sea. Under the combined efforts of the wind and its 400 horsepower, it was going at the rate of 13 knots. Had it not been for the superior strength of the hull of the Moravian, she would have been broken by the shock and gone down with the 237 passengers she was bringing home from Canada. The accident happened at about 5 o'clock in the morning as the day was breaking. The officers of the quarterdeck hurried to the after part of the vessel. They examined the sea with the most scrupulous attention. They saw nothing but a strong eddy about 3 cables' length distant, as if the surface had been violently agitated. The bearings of the place were taken exactly, and the Moravian continued its route without apparent damage. Had it struck a submerged rock or an enormous wreck? They could not tell, but on examination of the ship's bottom when undergoing repairs, it was found that part of her keel was broken. This fact, so grave in itself, might perhaps have forgotten like many others if, 3 weeks after, it had not been reenacted under similar circumstances. But thanks to the nationality of the victim of the shock, thanks to the reputation of the company to which the vessel belonged, the circumstance became extensively circulated. The 13th of April, 1867, the sea being beautiful, the breeze favorable, the Scotia of the Cunard Company's line found herself in 15 degrees 12 longitude and 45 degrees 37 minutes latitude. She was going at the speed of 13 knots and a half. At 17 minutes past 4 in the afternoon, whilst the passengers were assembled at lunch in the great saloon, a slight shock was felt on the hull of the Scotia on her quarter, a little aft of the port paddle. The Scotia had not struck, but she had been struck, and seemingly by something rather sharp and penetrating than blunt. The shock had been so slight that no one had been alarmed had it not been for the shouts of the carpenter's watch, who rushed onto the bridge exclaiming, "We are sinking! We are sinking!" At first the passengers were much frightened, but Captain Anderson hastened to reassure them. The danger could not be imminent. The Scotia, divided into 7 compartments by strong partitions, could brave with impunity any leak. Captain Anderson went down immediately into the hold. He found that the sea was pouring into the 5th compartment, and the rapidity of the influx proved that the force of the water was considerable. Fortunately, this compartment did not hold the boilers, or the fires would have been immediately extinguished. Captain Anderson ordered the engines to be stopped at once, and one of his men went down to ascertain the extent of the injury. Some minutes afterwards, they discovered the existence of a large hole of 2 yards in diameter in the ship's bottom. Such a leak could not be stopped, and the Scotia, her paddles half submerged, was obliged to continue her course. She was then 300 miles from Cape Clear, and after 3 days' delay, which caused great uneasiness in Liverpool, she entered the basin of the company. Not bad, Romano. We're still in the first chapter. Still in the first chapter. The engineers visited the Scotia, which was put in dry dock. They could scarcely believe it possible. At 2 yards and a half below watermark was a regular rent in the form of an isosceles triangle. The broken place in the iron plates was so perfectly defined that it could have not been done more neatly by a punch. It was clear, then, that the instrument producing the perforation was not of a common stamp, and after having been driven with prodigious strength, piercing an iron plate 1 3/8 inches thick, had withdrawn itself by a retrograde motion truly inexplicable. Such was the last fact, which resulted in exciting once more the torrent of public opinion. From this moment, all unlucky casualties which could not be otherwise accounted for were put down to the monster. Upon this imaginary creature rested the responsibility of all these shipwrecks, which unfortunately were considerable, for of 3,000 ships whose loss was annually recorded at Lloyd's, the number of sailing and steamships supposedly to be totally lost from the absence of all news amounted to not less than 200. Now, it was the monster who, justly or unjustly, was accused of their disappearance, and thanks to it, the communication between the different continents became more and more dangerous. The public demanded peremptorily that the seas should be, at any price, be relieved from this formidable cetacean. End of chapter 1. Chapter 2. Pro and Con. At the period when these events took place, I had just returned from a scientific research in the disagreeable territory of Nebraska in the United States. In virtue of my office as assistant professor in the Museum of Natural History in Paris, the French government had attached me to that expedition. After 6 months in Nebraska, I arrived in New York towards the end of March, laden with a precious collection. My departure for France was fixed for the first days in May. Meanwhile, I was occupying myself in classifying my mineralogical, botanical, and zoological riches when the accident happened to the Scotia. I was perfectly up in the subject, which was the question of the day. How could I be otherwise? I had read and reread all the American and European papers without being any nearer a conclusion. This mystery puzzled me. Under the impossibility of forming an opinion, I jumped from one extreme to the other. That there really was something could not be doubted, and the incredulous were invited to put their finger on the wound of the Scotia. On my arrival at New York, the question was at its height. The hypothesis of the floating island and the unapproachable sandbank, supported by minds little competent to form a judgment, was abandoned, and indeed, unless the shoal had a machine in its stomach, how could it change its position with such astonishing rapidity? From the same cause, the idea of a floating hull of an enormous wreck was given up. There remained then only two possible solutions for the question, which created two distinct parties. On one side, those who were for a monster of colossal strength. On the other, those who were for a submarine vessel of enormous motive power. But this last hypothesis, plausible as it was, could not stand against inquiries made in both worlds. That a private gentleman should have such a machine at his command was not likely. Where, when, and how was it built? And how could its construction have been kept secret? Certainly a government might possess such a destructive machine, and in these disastrous times when the ingenuity of a man has multiplied the power of weapons of war, it was possible that, without the knowledge of others, a state might try to work such a formidable engine. After the chase pots from the torpedoes, and the torpedoes then submarine and after the chassepots came the torpedoes. After the torpedoes, the submarine rams. Then the reaction. At least I hope so. But the hypothesis of a war machine fell before the declaration of governments. As public interest was in question, and transatlantic communication suffered, their veracity could not be doubted. But how admit that the construction of the submarine boat had escaped the public eye? For a private gentleman to keep the secret under such circumstances would be very difficult, and for a state whose every act is persistently watched by powerful rivals, certainly impossible. After inquiries made in England, France, Russia, Prussia, Spain, Italy, and America, even in Turkey, the hypothesis of a submarine monitor was definitely rejected. Upon my arrival in New York, several persons did me the honor of consulting me on the phenomena in question. I had published in France a work in quarto in 2 volumes entitled Mysteries of the Great Submarine Grounds. This book, highly approved of in the learned world, gained for me a special reputation in this rather obscure branch of natural history. My advice was asked. As long as I could deny the reality of the fact, I confined myself to a decided negative. But soon, finding myself driven into a corner, I was obliged to explain myself categorically, and even the Honorable Pierre Ahonat, professor in the Museum of Paris, was called upon by the New York Herald to express a definite opinion of some sort. I did something. I spoke, for want of power to hold my tongue. I discussed the question in all its forms, politically and scientifically, and I give here an extract from a carefully studied article which I published in the number of the 30th of April. It ran as follows. After examining one by one the different hypotheses, rejecting all other suggestions, it becomes necessary to admit the existence of a marine animal of enormous power. The great depths of the ocean are entirely unknown to us. Soundings cannot reach them. What passes in these remote depths, what beings live or can live, 12 or 15 miles beneath the surface of the waters, what is the organization of those animals, we can scarcely conjecture. However, the solution of the problem submitted to me may modify the form of the dilemma. Either we do know all the varieties of beings which people our planet, or we do not. If we do not know them all, if nature has still secrets in ichthyology for us, nothing is more comfortable to reason than to admit the existence of fishes, or cetaceans of other kinds, or even of new species, of an organization formed to inhabit the strata inaccessible to surroundings, and which an accident of some sort, either fantastical or capricious, has brought at long intervals to the upper level of the ocean. If, on the contrary, we do know all living things, we must necessarily seek for the animal in question amongst those marine beings already classed, and in that case I should be disposed to admit the existence of a gigantic narwhal. The common narwhal, or unicorn of the sea, often attains the length of 60 feet. Increase its size fivefold or tenfold, give it strength proportionate to its size, lengthen its destructive weapons, and you obtain the animal required. It will have the proportions determined by the officers of the Shannon, the instrument required by the perforation of the Scotia, and the power necessary to pierce the hull of the steamer. Indeed, the narwhal is armed with a sort of ivory sword, a halberd, according to the expression of certain naturalists. The principal tusk has the hardness of steel. Some of these tusks have been found buried in the bodies of whales, which the unicorn always attacks with success. Others have been drawn out, not without trouble, from the bottoms of ships, which they had pierced through and through as a gimlet pierces a barrel. The Museum of the Faculty of Medicine of Paris possesses one of these defensive weapons, 2 yards and a quarter in length, and 15 inches in diameter to the base. Very well. Suppose this weapon to be 6 times stronger, and the animal 10 times more powerful. Launch it at a rate of 20 miles an hour, and you obtain a shock capable of producing the catastrophe required. Until further information, therefore, I shall maintain it to be a sea unicorn of colossal dimensions, armed not with a halberd, but with a real spur, as the armored frigates or the rams of war, whose massiveness and motive power it would possess at the same time. Thus may this puzzling phenomena be explained, unless there be something over and above all that one has ever conjectured, seen, perceived, or experienced, which is just within the bounds of possibility. Books, Brews, and Booze, thank you for the follow. Welcoming. Come on and get comfy. These last words were cowardly on my part, but up to a certain point, I wished to shelter my dignity as professor and not give too much cause for laughter to the Americans who laugh well when they do laugh. I reserved for myself a way of escape. In effect, however, I admitted the existence of the monster. My article was warmly discussed, which procured it a high reputation. It rallied around it a certain number of partisans. The solution it proposed gave, at least, full liberty to the imagination. The human mind delights in grand conceptions of supernatural beings. And the sea is precisely the best vehicle, the only medium through which these giants, against which terrestrial animals such as elephants or rhinoceroses are nothing, can be produced or developed. Books, Brews, and Booze. Are you a streamer? That looks like a streamer name. Do you do reading? We only do reading 1 day a week, so welcome to it. But if you are, I'll give you a follow as well. Also, guys, we I sure do. Nice. Guys, let's follow Books, Brews, and Booze. Another reading streamer. There we go. This marbles race is about to end, so we'll take a 30-second break here while this ends. Thank you. Yeah, we haven't found very many. We've only read 1 book so far. We just started doing this recently. We read Treasure Island in 4 parts. And so now we're doing this, and when we get about halfway through, we'll take a vote on the next one. The current vote was for this one was between a study in Scarlet, The Wizard of Oz, and Winnie the Pooh. So they went with this one. We'll see what they come up with next. All right, Annie gets 117 points. Alex got 96, and I got 74. GG's, guys. Bookish Twitch is ascending. Heck yes. All right, guys. So we are going to start another race. Now, this is a half-hour marble race, so we don't have to keep going back to it. But chance for you to get some points if you want. So play to play. Play to... Oh, I forgot. I got to go back and I turned off. Play to play. If you guys want to get some points in. Now, we will do quick race cleanups when we get done reading. For anybody that wants to go. And then we'll keep rolling some balls afterwards. Because the stream will last longer than the reading segment. But we're going to read for about another hour and a half. So, all right. You've got 2.5 minutes to get in. Did I change my settings again? I changed all kinds of settings. Oh, sound effects are off, Annie. Sound effects are off. On the mic? No, I did not. Are you changing things, Annie? Do I sound... It sounds like it used to in a good way. Okay. Then yes, I did. I definitely changed it. I just did. It's perfect again, right? All right, let's get back to it, guys. You still have a minute and a half to get into the marbles race if you want. We'll take another little break when the Stream Raiders is battle, and then we'll get right back to it. Here we go, guys. So, just to recap, you have unexplainable phenomena in the oceans going on. Professor Ahona is become somewhat of an expert on it and has given a review in a paper that has been widely circulated, but he left himself a little out at the end, and let's see what happens. The industrial and commercial papers treated the question chiefly from this point of view. The Shipping and Mercantile Gazette, the Lloyd's List, the Packet Boat, and the Maritime and Colonial Review, all papers devoted to insurance companies which threatened to raise the rates of premium, were unanimous on this point. Public opinion had been pronounced. The United States were the first in the field, and in New York, they made preparations for an expedition destined to pursue this narwhal. A frigate of great speed, the Abraham Lincoln, was put in commission as soon as possible. The arsenals were opened to Commander Farragut, who hastening the arming of this frigate. But, as it always happens, the moment it was decided to pursue the monster did not appear. For 2 months, no one heard it spoken of. No ship met it. It seemed as if this unicorn knew of the plots weaving around it. It had been so much talked of, even through the Atlantic cable, that jesters pretended that this slender fly had stopped a telegram on its passage and was making the most of it. So when the frigate had been armed for a long campaign and provided with formidable fishing apparatus, no one could tell what course to pursue. Impatience grew apace when, on the 2nd of July, they learned that a steamer on the line of San Francisco from California to Shanghai had seen the animal 3 weeks before in the North Pacific Ocean. The excitement caused by this news was extreme. The ship was revictualled and well stocked with coal. 3 hours before the Abraham Lincoln left Brooklyn Pier, I received a letter worded as follows. To Monsieur Ahonat, professor in the Museum of Paris, Fifth Avenue Hotel, New York. Sir, if you will consent to join the Abraham Lincoln in this expedition, the government of the United States will with pleasure see France represented in this enterprise. Commander Farragut has a cabin at your disposal. Very cordially yours, J.B. Hobson, Secretary of Marine. End of chapter 2. Chapter 3. I form my resolution. 3 seconds before the arrival of J.B. Hobson's letter, I no more thought of pursuing the unicorn than of attempting the passage of the North Sea. 3 seconds after reading the letter of the Honorable Secretary of Marine, I felt that my true vocation, the sole end of my life, was to chase this disturbing monster and purge it from the world. But I had just returned from a fatiguing journey, weary and longing for repose. I aspired to nothing more than again seeing my country, my friends, and my little lodging by the Jardin des Plantes, my dear and precious collections. But nothing could keep me back. I forgot all, fatigue, friends, and collections, and accepted without hesitation the offer of the American government. Besides, thought I, all roads lead back to Europe, for my particular benefit, and I will not hurry me towards the coast of France. This worthy animal may allow itself to be caught in the seas of Europe for my particular benefit, and I will not bring back less than half a yard of this ivory halberd to the Museum of Natural History. But in the meanwhile, I must seek this narwhal in the North Pacific Ocean, which, to return to France, was taking the road to the Antipodes. Conseil, I called in an impatient voice. Conseil was my servant, a true, devoted Flemish boy who had accompanied me in all my travels. I liked him, and he returned the liking well. He was phlegmatic by nature, regular from principle, zealous from habit, evincing little disturbance at the different surprises of life, very quick with his hands, and apt at any service required of him, and, despite his name, never giving advice, even when asked for it. Conseil had followed me for the last 10 years, wherever science led. Never once did he complain of the length or fatigue of a journey, never make an objection to pack his portmanteau for whatever country it might be, or however far away, whether China or Congo. Besides all this, he had good health, which defied all sickness, and solid muscles, but no nerves. Good morals are understood. This boy was 30 years old, and his age to that of his master as 15 to 20. May I be excused for saying that I was 40 years old. But Conseil had one fault. He was ceremonious to a degree, and would never speak to me but in the third person, which was sometimes provoking. Conseil, I said again, beginning with feverish hands to make preparations for my departure. Certainly I was sure of this devoted boy, as a rule. I never asked him if it were convenient for him to or not to follow me in my travels, but this time the expedition in question might be prolonged, and the enterprise might be hazardous in pursuit of an animal capable of sinking a frigate as easily as a nutshell. Here there was matter for reflection, even to the most impassive man in the world. What would Conseil say? Conseil! I called a third time. Conseil appeared. Did you call, sir? Said he, entering. Yes, my boy. Make preparations for me and yourself, too. We leave in 2 hours. As you please, sir, replied Conseil, quietly. Not an instant to lose. Lock in my trunk all traveling utensils, coats, shirts, and stockings, without counting as many as you can, and make haste. And your collection, sir? Observed Conseil. We will think of them by and by. What? The Archaeotherium? The Hierocotarium? The Aurelions? The Carapotamus and the other skins? They will keep at the hotel. And your live Barbarossa, sir. They will feed it during our absence. Besides, I will give orders to forward our menagerie to France. We are not returning to Paris, then? Said Conseil. Oh, certainly, I answered evasively, by making a curve. Will the curve please you, sir? Oh, it will be nothing. Not quite so direct a road, that is all. We take our passage in the Abraham Lincoln. As you think proper, sir, coolly replied Conseil. You see, my friend, it has to do with the monster, the famous narwhal. We are going to purge it from the seas. The author of a work in quarto in 2 volumes on the mysteries of the great submarine grounds cannot forbear embarking with Commander Farragut. A glorious mission, but a dangerous one. We cannot tell where we may go. These animals can be very capricious, but we will go whether or no. We have got a captain who is pretty wide awake. I opened a credit account for Barbarossa and Conseil following. I jumped into a cab. Our luggage was transported to the deck of the frigate immediately. I hastened on board and asked for Commander Farragut. One of the sailors conducted me to the poop, where I found myself in the presence of a good-looking officer who held out his hand to me. Monsieur Pierre Arena, said he. Himself, replied I. Commander Farragut? You are welcome, Professor. Your cabin is ready for you. I bowed, and the desire to be conducted to the cabin distant for me. So Conseil is the manservant of Professor Ahana, who is our main character and our narrator, and our expert. He is now boarded the Abraham Lincoln with Commander Farragut in charge, who, by all means, appears to be a good egg. We'll see what happens. Books, brews, and booze. What are we reading? Well, what are you reading currently? What's the haps and the craps on your end of the world? Are you in the middle of something? Are you about to start something? Let us know so people can come hang out. One, Blue, Dez, Asian Fire, and Razor. Get the bone. We're on a loyalty gold chest, guys. How is that not ready? A zombie horror humor story by Kraken Not Stirred, a fellow streamer. Oh, that's awesome. Trey cool. I'll reiterate, guys, that there's going to be some technical stuff in here, and there's going to be some foreign words in here, and there's going to be some old-timey words in here. If I butcher them, which I probably will at some point, feel free to correct me or just let it slide. If there's anything I just have absolutely no clue on, we'll look it up. Thank you guys for your units and good luck on the next battle. Nice. It's a prodigious reading list. I won't acknowledge it because I'm going to get back to reading, but go ahead and tell us when your next stream is, so if people are interested, they can come check you out. The Abraham Lincoln had been well chosen and equipped for her new destination. She was a frigate of great speed, fitted with high-pressure engines which admitted a pressure of 7 atmospheres. Under this, the Abraham Lincoln attained the mean speed of nearly 18 knots in a third an hour, a considerable speed, but nevertheless insufficient to grapple with this gigantic cetacean. The interior arrangements of the frigate corresponded to its nautical qualities. I was well satisfied with my cabin, which was in the after part, opening upon the gunroom. "Well, shall we be off here?" said I to Conseil. "As well, by your honour's leave, as a hermit crab in the shell of a whelk," said Conseil. I left Conseil to stow our trunks conveniently away and remounted the poop in order to survey the preparations for departure. At the moment, Commander Farragut was ordering the last moorings to be cast loose, which held the Abraham Lincoln to the pier of Brooklyn, so in a quarter of an hour, perhaps less, the frigate would have sailed without me. I should have missed this extraordinary, supernatural, and incredible expedition, the recital of which may well meet with some skepticism. But Commander Farragut would not lose a day nor an hour in scouring these seas in which the animal had been sighted. He sent for the engineer. "Is the steam full on?" asked he. "Yes, sir," replied the engineer. "Go ahead," cried Commander Farragut. The quay of Brooklyn and all the part of New York bordering on the East River was crowded with spectators. 3 cheers burst successfully from 500,000 throats. Thousands of handkerchiefs were waved above the heads of the compact mass, saluting the Abraham Lincoln until she reached the waters of the Hudson, at the point of that elongated peninsula which forms the town of New York. Then the frigate, following the coast of New Jersey along the right bank of the beautiful river, covered with villas, passed by between the forts, which saluted her with the heaviest guns. The Abraham Lincoln answered by hoisting the American colors 3 times, whose 39 stars shone resplendent from the mizzen peak, then modifying its speed to take the narrow channel marked by buoys placed in the inner bay formed by Sandy Hook Point. It coasted the long sandy beach, where some thousands of spectators gave it one final cheer. The escort of boats and tenders still followed the frigate, and did not leave her until they came abreast of the lightship, whose 2 lights marked the entrance of New York Channel. Now remember, guys, this is taking place a long time ago, so 39 stars was not a misprint. That was the number of states at that point. 6 bells struck. The pilot got into his boat and rejoined the little schooner, which was waiting under our lee. The fires were made up. The screws beat the waves more rapidly. The frigate skirted the low yellow coast of Long Island, and at 8 bells, after having lost sight in the northwest of the lights of Fire Island, she ran at full steam onto the dark waters of the Atlantic. End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4. Ned Land. Captain Farragut was a good seaman, worthy of the frigate he commanded. His vessel and he were one. He was the soul of it. On the question of the cetacean, there was no doubt in his mind, and he would not allow the existence of the animal to be disputed on board. He believed in it, as certain good women believe in the Leviathan, by faith, not by reason. The monster did exist, and he had sworn to rid the seas of it. He was a kind of Knight of Rhodes, a second Dieudonne de Gozon, going to meet the serpent which desolated the island. Either Captain Farragut would kill the narwhal, or the narwhal would kill the captain. There was no third course. The officers on board shared the opinion of their chief. They were ever chatting, discussing and calculating the various chances of a meeting, watching narrowly the vast surface of the ocean. More than one took up his quarters voluntarily in the cross trees, who would have cursed such a berth under any other circumstances. As long as the sun described its daily course, the rigging was crowded with sailors whose feet were burnt to such an extent by the heat of the deck as to render it unbearable. Still, the Abraham Lincoln had not yet breasted the suspected waters of the Pacific. As to the ship's company, they desired nothing better than to meet the Unicorn, to harpoon it, hoist it on board, and dispatch it. They watched the sea with eager attention. Besides, Captain Farragut had spoken of a certain sum of $2,000 set apart for whoever should first sight the monster, were he cabin boy, common seaman, or officer. I leave you to judge how eyes were used on board the Abraham Lincoln. For my own part, I was not behind the others, and left to no one my share of daily observations. The frigate may have been called the Argus for 100 reasons. Only one among us, Conseil, seemed to protest by his indifference against the question which so interested us all. He seemed to be out of keeping with the general enthusiasm on board. I have said that Captain Farragut had carefully provided the ship with every apparatus for catching the gigantic cetacean. No whaler had ever been better armed. We possessed every known engine, from the harpoon thrown by the hand to the barbed arrows of the blunderbuss and the explosive balls of the duck gun. On the forecastle lay the perfection of a breech-loading gun, very thick at the breech and very narrow in the bore, the model of which had been in the exhibition of 1867. The precious weapon of American origin could throw with ease a conical projection of 9 pounds to a mean distance of 10 miles. Thus the Abraham Lincoln wanted for no means of destruction, and, what was better still, she had on board Ned Land, the prince of harpooners. Ned Land was a Canadian, with an uncommon quickness of hand, and who knew no equal in his dangerous occupation. Skill, coolness, audacity, and cunning he possessed in a superior degree, and it must be a cunning whale or a singularly cute cachalot to escape the stroke of his harpoon. Ned Land was about 40 years of age. He was a tall man, more than 6 feet high, strongly built, grave, and taciturn, occasionally violent, and very passionate when contradicted. His person attracted attention, but above all the boldness of his look, which gave a singular expression to his face. Who calls himself Canadian calls himself French, and little communicative as Ned Land was, I must admit that he took a certain liking for me. My nationality drew him to me, no doubt. It was an opportunity for him to talk and for me to hear that old language of Rabelais, which is still in use in some Canadian provinces. The harpooner's family was originally from Quebec, and was already a tribe of hardy fishermen when this town belonged to France. Little by little, Ned Land acquired a taste for chatting, and I loved to hear the recital of his adventures in the polar seas. He related his fishing and his combats with natural poetry of expression. His recital took the form of an epic poem, and I seemed to be listening to a Canadian Homer singing the Iliad of the regions of the north. I am portraying this hardy companion as I really knew him. We're old friends now, united in that unchangeable friendship which is born and cemented amidst extreme dangers. Ah, brave Ned. I ask no more to live 100 years longer, that I may have more time to dwell the longer on your memory. Now, what was Ned Land's opinion upon the question of the marine monster? I must admit that he did not believe in the unicorn, and was the only one on board who did not share that universal conviction. He even avoided the subject, which I one day thought it my duty to press upon him. One magnificent evening, the 30th of July, that is to say 3 weeks after our departure, the frigate was abreast of Cape Blanc, 30 miles to the leeward of the coast of Patagonia. We had crossed the Tropic of Capricorn, and the Straits of Magellan opened less than 700 miles to the south. Before 8 days were over, the Abraham Lincoln would be plowing the waters of the Pacific. Seated on the poop, Ned Land and I were chatting of one thing and another as we looked at this mysterious sea, whose great depths had up to this time been inaccessible to the eye of man. I naturally led up the conversation to the great unicorn, and examined the various chances of success or failure of the expedition. But, seeing that Ned Land let me speak without saying too much, I pressed him more closely. "Well, Ned," said I, "is it possible that you are not convinced of the existence of this cetacean that we are following? Have you any particular reason for being so incredulous?" The harpooner looked at me fixedly for some moments before answering, struck his broad forehead with his hand, a habit of his, and as if to collect himself, and said at last, "Perhaps I have, Mr. Arnott." "But, Ned, you are a whaler by profession, familiarized with all the great marine mammalia. You, whose imagination might have easily accepted the hypothesis of enormous cetaceans, you, are to be the last to doubt under such circumstances. This is just what deceives you, Professor, replied Ned. That the vulgar should believe in extraordinary comets traversing space and in the existence of antediluvian monsters in the heart of the globe may well be, but neither astronomer nor geologist believes in such chimeras. As a whaler, I have followed many a cetacean, harpooned a great number, and killed several. But however strong or well armed they may have been, neither their tails nor their weapons would have been even able to scratch the iron plates of a steamer. But Ned, they tell of ships with the teeth of narwhal have pierced through and through. Wooden ships, that is possible, replied the Canadian. But I have never seen it done, and until further proof, I deny that whales, cetaceans, or sea unicorns could ever produce the effect you describe. Well, Ned, I repeat it with the conviction resting on the logic of facts. I believe in the existence of a mammal powerfully organized, belonging to the branch of vertebrata, like the whales, the cachalots, or the dolphins, and furnished with the horn of defense of great penetrating power. We'll hopefully see it at your place. Huh, said the harpooner, shaking his head with the air of a man who would not be convinced. Notice one thing, my worthy Canadian. If such an animal is in existence, if it inhabits the depth of the oceans, if it frequents the strata lying miles below the surface of the water, it must necessarily possess an organization the strength of which would defy all comparison. And why this powerful organization? Demanded Ned. Because it requires incalculable strength to keep oneself in these strata and resist their pressure. Listen to me, let us admit that the pressure of the atmosphere is represented by the weight of a column of water 32 feet high. In reality, the column of water would be shorter, as we are speaking of seawater, the density of which is greater than that of fresh water. Very well, when you dive, Ned, as many times 32 feet of water as there are above you, so many times does your body bear a pressure equal to that of the atmosphere, that is to say, 15 pounds. For each square inch of its surface, it follows, then, that at 320 feet this pressure, that of 10 atmospheres, of 100 atmospheres at 3,200 feet, and of 1,000 atmospheres at 32,000 feet, that is, about 6 miles, which is equivalent to saying that if you could attain this depth in the ocean, each square 3/8 of an inch of the surface of your body would bear a pressure of 5,600 pounds. Ah! My brave Ned, do you know how many square inches you carry on the surface of your body? I have no idea, Mr. Araya. About 6,500. And as in reality the atmospheric pressure is about 15 pounds to the square inch, your 6,500 square inches bear at this moment a pressure of 97,500 pounds. Without my perceiving it? Without your perceiving it. And if you are not crushed by such a pressure, it is because the air penetrates the interior of your body with equal pressure, hence perfect equilibrium between the interior and exterior pressure, which thus neutralize each other, and which allows you to bear it without inconvenience. But in the water, it is another thing. Yes, I understand, replied Ned, becoming more attentive, because the water surrounds me, but does not penetrate. Precisely, Ned. So that at 32 feet beneath the surface of the sea, you would undergo a pressure of 97,500 pounds. At 320 feet, 10 times that pressure. At 3,200 feet, 100 times that pressure. Lastly, at 32,000 feet, 1,000 times that pressure would be 97,500,000 pounds. That is to say, that you would be flattened as if you had been drawn from the plates of a hydraulic machine. The devil! Exclaimed Ned. Very well, my worthy harpooner, if some vertebrae, several hundred yards long and large in proportion, can maintain itself in such depths, of whose surface is represented by millions of square inches, that is, by tens of millions of pounds, we must estimate the pressure they undergo. Consider, then, what must be the resistance of their bony structure and the strength of their organization to withstand such pressure. Why, exclaimed Ned Land, they must be made of iron plates, 8 inches thick, like the armored frigates. As you say, Ned, and think what destruction such a marriage would cause. if hurled with the speed of an express train across the hull of a vessel. Yes, certainly, perhaps, replied the Canadian, shaken by these figures, but not yet willing to give in. Well, have I convinced you? You have convinced me of one thing, sir, which is that if such animals do exist at the bottom of the seas, they must certainly be as strong as you say. But if they do not exist, mine obstinate harpooner, how explain the incident to the Scotia? End of chapter 4. All right, I'm going to go to the restroom real quick. I'll be right back. All right, it looks like we're about to finish this marble race. We'll get another long one going after this one. We had 9 people in this race. We have 3 yeets and 4 finishes right now, which is about right. It's about just over 50% yeet on this map. All right, we had too many people finish, 6 out of 9. But 96 points for Butterfly. Dalek got 79. Shadowfire got 61. Play to play. Get them on, get them in. Get them in, get them on. 3 minutes are going up on the clock. Get them in. So we have met Conseil, we have met Professor Pierre Ahana, and we have met now Ned Land. Top that off with Captain Farragut. We've got ourselves a venture, which is our next chapter. Chapter 5, At a Venture. The voyage of the Abraham Lincoln was for a long time marked by no special incident. Chapter 5, At a Venture. The voyage of the Abraham Lincoln was for a long time marked by no special incident, But one circumstance happened which showed the wonderful dexterity of Ned Land and proved what confidence we might place in him. The 30th of June, the frigate spoke some American whalers from whom we learned that they knew nothing about the narwhal, but one of them, the captain of the Monroe, knowing that Ned Land had shipped on board the Abraham Lincoln, begged for his help in chasing a whale they had in sight. Commander Farragut, desirous of seeing Ned Land at work, gave him permission to go on board the Monroe, and fate served our Canadian so well that instead of one whale, he harpooned two with a double blow, striking one straight to the heart and catching the other after some minutes' pursuit. Decidedly, if the monster ever had to do with Ned Land's harpoon, I would not bet in its favor. The frigate skirted the southeast coast of America with great rapidity. The 3rd of July, we were at the opening of the Straits of Magellan, leveled with Cape Verges. But Commander Farragut would not take a tortuous passage, but doubled Cape Horn. The ship's crew agreed with him, and certainly it was possible that they might meet the narwhal in this narrow pass. Many of the sailors affirmed that the monster could not pass there, that he was too big for that. The 6th of July, about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the Abraham Lincoln, at 15 miles to the south, doubled the solitary island, this lost rock at the extremity of the American continent, to which some Dutch sailors gave the names of their native town, Cape Horn. The course was taken towards the northwest, and the next day the screw of the frigate was at last beating the waters of the Pacific. "Keep your eyes open," called out the sailors. And they were opened widely, both eyes and glasses a little dazzled, it is true, by the prospect of $2,000, had not an instant's repose. Day and night they watched the surface of the ocean, and even nyctalopes, whose faculty of seeing in the darkness multiplies their chances 100-fold, would have had enough to do to gain a prize. I myself, for whom money had no charms, was not the least attentive on board, giving but few minutes to my meals, but for a few hours of sleep. Indifferent to either rain or sunshine, I did not leave the poop of the vessel. Now leaning on the netting of the forecastle, now on the taffrail, I devoured with eagerness the soft foam which whitened the sea as far as the eye could see. And how often have I shared this motion of the majority of the crew when some capricious whale would raised its black back above the waves. The poop of the vessel crowded in a moment. The cabins poured forth a torrent of sailors and officers, each with heaving breast and troubled eye, watching the course of the cetacean. I looked and looked till I was nearly blind, whilst Conseil, always phlegmatic, kept repeating in a calm voice, "If, sir, you would not squint so much, you would see better." But vain excitement. The Abraham Lincoln checked its speed and made for the animal signaled, a simple whale, or common cachalot, and which soon disappeared amidst a storm of execration. But the weather was good. The voyage was being accomplished under the most favorable auspices. It was then the bad season in Australia, the July of that zone corresponding to our January in Europe. But the sea was beautiful and easily scanned round a vast circumference. The 20th of July, the Tropic of Capricorn was cut by 105 degree of longitude, and the 27th of the same month we crossed the equator on the 110th meridian. This passed, the frigate took a more decidedly westerly direction and scoured the central waters of the Pacific. Commander Farragut thought, and with reason, that it was better to remain in deep water and clear of continents or islands, which the beast itself seemed to shun, perhaps because there was not enough water for him, suggested the greater part of the crew. The frigate passed at some distance from the Marquesas and the Sandwich Islands, crossed the Tropic of Cancer, and made for the China Seas. We were on the theater of the last diversions of the monster, and, to say truth, we no longer lived on board. Hearts palpitated, fearfully preparing themselves for future incurable aneurysm. The entire ship's crew were undergoing a nervous excitement of which I can give no idea. They could not eat, they could not sleep 20 times a day. A misconception or an optical illusion of some sailor seated on the taffrail would cause dreadful perspirations, and in these emotions, 20 times repeated, kept us in a state of excitement so violent that a reaction was unavoidable. And truly, reaction soon showed itself. For 3 months, during which a day seemed an age, the Abraham Lincoln furrowed all the waters of the North Pacific, running at whales, making sharp deviations from her course, veering suddenly from one tack to another, stopping suddenly, putting on steam, and backing ever and anon at the risk of deranging her machinery, and not one point of the Japanese or American coast was left unexplored. The warmest partisans of the enterprise now became its most ardent detractors. Reaction mounted from the crew to the captain itself, and certainly, had it not been for resolute determination on the part of Captain Farragut, the frigate would have headed due southward. This useless search could not last much longer. The Abraham Lincoln had nothing to reproach herself with, and she had done her best to succeed. Never had an American ship's crew shown more zeal or patience. Its failure could not be placed to their charge. There remained nothing but to return. This was represented to the commander. The sailors could not hide their discontent, and their service suffered. I will not say there was a mutiny on board, but after a reasonable period of obstinacy, Captain Farragut, as Columbus did, asked for 3 days' patience. If in 3 days the monster did not appear, the man at the helm should give 3 turns of the wheel, and the Abraham Lincoln would make for the European seas. This promise was made on the 2nd of November. It had the effect of rallying the ship's crew. The ocean was watched with renewed attention. Each one wished for a last glance in which to sum up his remembrance. Glasses were used with feverish activity. It was a grand defiance given to the giant narwhal, and he could scarcely fail to answer the summons and appear. 2 days passed. The steam was at half pressure. 1,000 schemes were tried to attract the attention and stimulate the apathy of the animal in case it should be met in these parts. Large quantities of bacon were trailed in the wake of the ship, to the great satisfaction, I must say, of the sharks. Small craft radiated in all directions around the Abraham Lincoln as she lay to, and did not leave a spot of the sea unexplored. But the night of the 4th of November arrived without the unveiling of this submarine mystery. The next day, the 5th of November at 12, the delay would, morally speaking, expire. After that time, Captain Farragut, faithful to his promise, was to turn the course of the southeast and abandon forever the northern regions of the Pacific. The frigate was then in 31 degrees 15 minutes north latitude and 136 degrees 42 minutes east longitude. The coast of Japan still remained less than 200 miles to leeward. Night was approaching. They had just struck 8 bells. Large clouds veiled the face of the moon, then in its first quarter. The sea undulated peaceably under the stem of the vessel. At that moment, I was leaning forward on the starboard netting. Conseil, standing near me, was looking straight before him. The crew, perched in the ratlines, examined the horizon, which contracted and darkened by degrees. Officers with their night glasses scoured the growing darkness. Sometimes the ocean sparkled under the rays of the moon, which darted between 2 clouds, and then all trace of light was lost in the darkness. I was looking at Conseil. I could see he was undergoing a little of the general influence. At least I thought so. Perhaps for the first time his nerves vibrated to a sentiment of curiosity. "Come, Conseil," said I. "This is the last chance of pocketing the $2,000. "Might I be permitted to say, sir," replied Conseil, "that I never reckoned on getting the prize, and—" "Thank you for the follow. Come on in and get comfy. Let's hang out." Thank you very much. Alright, we got another Stream Raiders battle going up, guys. I'm going to place a bomber and then collect a couple quests. Thank you for your units and good luck on the next battle, guys. We'll reread that last paragraph. "Would it be permitted to say, sir," replied Conseil, "that I never reckoned on getting the prize, and had the government of the Union offered $100,000, it would have been none the poorer." "You are right, Conseil. It is a foolish affair after all, and one upon which we entered too lightly. What time lost, what useless emotions. We should have been back in France 6 months ago." "In your little room, sir," replied Conseil, "and in your museum, sir, and I should have already classed all your fossils, sir. And the Barbarossa would have been installed in its cage in the Jardin des Plantes, and have drawn all the curious people of the capital." "As you say, Conseil. I fancy we shall run a fair chance of being laughed at our pains." "That's tolerably certain," replied Conseil quietly. "I think they will make fun of you, sir, and, must I say it?" "Go on, my good friend." "Well, sir, you will only get your deserts." "Indeed! When one has the honor of being a savant as you are, sir, one should not expose oneself to—" Conseil had not time to finish his compliment. In the midst of general silence, a voice had just been heard. It was the voice of Ned Land, shouting, "Look out there! The very thing for our looking for! On our weather beam!" End of chapter 5. Chapter 6. At Full Steam. At this cry, the whole ship's crew hurried towards the harpooner. Commanders, officers, masters, sailors, cabin boys, even the engineers left their engines, and the stokers their furnaces. The order to stop her had been given, and the frigate now simply went on by her own momentum. The darkness was then profound, and however good the Canadian's eyes were, I asked myself how he managed to see, and what he had been able to see. My heart beat as if it would break. But Ned Land was not mistaken, and we all perceived the object he pointed to. At 2 cables' length from the Abraham Lincoln on the starboard quarter, the sea seemed to be illuminated all over. It was not a mere phosphoric phenomena. The monster emerged some fathoms from the water and then threw out that very intense but inexplicable light mentioned in the reports of several captains. This magnificent iridation must have been produced by an agent of great shining power. The luminous part traced on the sea an immense oval, much elongated, the center of which condensed a burning heat whose overpowering brilliancy died out by successive gradations. "It's only an agglomeration of phosphoric particles," cried one of the officers. "No, sir, certainly not," I replied. "Never did Folades or Salfé produce such a powerful light. That brightness is of an essentially electrical nature. Besides, see, it moves. It is moving forwards, backwards. It is darting towards us." A general cry rose from the frigate. "Silence!" said the captain. "Up with the helm! Reverse the engines!" The steam was shut off. The Abraham Lincoln, beating to port, described a semicircle. "Right the helm! Go ahead!" cried the captain. These orders were executed, and the frigate moved rapidly from the burning light. I was mistaken. She tried to sheer off, but the supernatural animal approached with a velocity double her own. We gasped for breath. Stupefaction more than fear made us dumb and motionless. The animal gained on us, sporting with the waves. It made the round of the frigate, which was then making 14 knots, and enveloped with the electric rings like luminous dust. Then it moved away 2 or 3 miles, leaving a phosphorescent track like those volumes of steam that the express trains leave behind. All at once, from the dark line of the horizon, whither it retired to gain its momentum, the monster rushed suddenly towards the Abraham Lincoln with alarming rapidity, stopping suddenly about 20 feet from the hull, and died out. Not diving under the water, for its brilliancy did not abate, but suddenly, as if the source of the brilliant emanation was exhausted. And then it reappeared on the other side of the vessel, as if it had turned and slid under the hull. Any moment a collision might have occurred, which would have been fatal to us. However, I was astonished at the maneuvers of the frigate. She fled and did not attack. On the captain's face, generally so impassive, was an expression of unaccountable astonishment. "Mr. Havana, I do not know with what formidable being I have to deal, and I will not imprudently risk my frigate in the midst of this darkness. Besides, how attack this unknown thing? How defend oneself from it? Wait for daylight, and the scene will change." "You have no doubt, further doubt, Captain, of the nature of the animal?" "No, sir. It is evidently a gigantic narwhal, and an electric one." "Perhaps," added I, "only one can approach with a gymnotus or a torpedo." "Undoubtedly," replied the captain. "If it possessed such dreadful power, it is the most terrible animal that ever was created. That is why, sir, I must be on my guard." The crew were all on their feet all night. No one thought of sleep. The Abraham Lincoln, not being able to struggle with such velocity, had moderated its pace and sailed at half speed. For its part, the narwhal, imitating the frigate, let the waves rock it at will and seemed decided not to leave the scene of the struggle. Towards midnight, however, it disappeared, or, to use a more appropriate term, it died out, like a large glowworm. Had it fled? One could only fear, not hope, but at 7 minutes to 1 o'clock in the morning, a deafening whistle was heard, like that produced by a body of water rushing with great violence. The captain, Ned Land, and I were then on the poop, eagerly peering through the profound darkness. "Ned Land," asked the commander, "you have often heard the roaring of whales?" "Often, sir, but never such whales, the sight of which had brought me into $2,000, if I could only approach within 4 harpoon lengths of it." "But to approach it," said the commander, "I ought to put a whaler at your disposal?" "Certainly, sir." "That will be trifling with the lives of my men." "And mine too," simply said the harpooner. Towards 2 o'clock in the morning, the burning light reappeared, not less intense, about 5 miles to windward of the Abraham Lincoln. Notwithstanding the distance and the noise of the wind and sea, one heard distinctly the loud strokes of the animal's tail and even its panting breath. It seemed that at the moment the enormous narwhal had come to take a breath at the surface of the water, the air was engulfed in its lungs like the steam and vast cylinders of a machine of 2,000 horsepower. "Hum," thought I. "A whale with the strength of a cavalry regiment would be a pretty whale." We were on the qui-vive till daylight and prepared for the combat. The fishing implements were laid among the hammock nettings. The second lieutenant loaded the blunderbusses, which could throw harpoons to a distance of a mile, and long duck guns with explosive bullets which inflicted mortal wounds to even most terrible animals. Ned Land contented himself with sharpening his harpoon, a terrible weapon in his hands. At 6 o'clock, day began to break, and with the first glimmer of light, the electrical light of the narwhal disappeared. At 7 o'clock, the day was sufficiently advanced, but a very thick sea fog obscured our view, and the best spyglasses could not pierce it. That caused disappointment and anger. I climbed the mizzenmast. Some officers were already perched on the mastheads. At 8 o'clock, the fog lay heavily on the waves, and its thick scrolls rose little by little. The horizon grew wider and clearer at the same time. Suddenly, just as on the day before, Ned Land's voice was heard. "The thing itself on the port quarter!" cried the harpooner. Every eye was turned towards the point indicated. There, a mile and a half from the frigate, a long, blackish body emerged a yard above the waves. Its tail, violently agitated, produced a considerable eddy. Never did a caudal appendage beat the sea with such violence. An immense track of dazzling whiteness marked the passage of the animal and described a long curve. The frigate approached the cetacean. I examined it thoroughly. The reports of the Shannon and of the Helvetia had rather exaggerated its size, and I estimated its length at only 250 feet. As to its dimensions, I could only conjecture them to be admirably proportioned. While I watched this phenomena, 2 jets of steam of water were ejected from its vents and rose to the height of 120 feet. Thus I ascertained its way of breathing. I concluded definitively that it belonged to the vertebrate branch, class Mammalia. The crew waited impatiently for their chief's orders. The latter, after having observed the animal attentively, called the engineer. The engineer ran to him. Sir, said the commander, you have steam up? Yes, sir, answered the engineer. Well, make up your fires and put on all steam. 3 hurrahs greeted this order. The time for the struggle had arrived. Some moments after, the 2 funnels of the frigate vomited torrents of black smoke, and the bridge quaked under the trembling of the boilers. The Abraham Lincoln, propelled by her wonderful screw, went straight at the animal. The latter allowed it to come within half a cable's length. Then, as if disdaining to dive, it took a little turn and stopped a short distance off. This pursuit lasted nearly 3/4 of an hour without the frigate gaining 2 yards on the cetacean. It was quite evident that at any rate we should never come up with it. Well, Mr. Land, asked the captain, do you advise me to put the boats out to sea? No, sir, replied Ned Land, because we shall not take that beast easily. What shall we do then? Put on more steam if you can, sir. With your leave, I meant to post myself under the bowsprit, and if we get within harpooning distance, I shall throw my harpoon. Go, Ned, said the captain. Engineer, put on more pressure. Ned Land went to his post. The fires were increased. The screw revolved 43 times a minute, and steam poured out of the valves. We heaved the log and calculated that the Abraham Lincoln was going at the rate of 18.5 miles an hour. But the accursed animal swam too at the rate of 18.5 miles an hour. For a whole hour, the frigate kept up this pace without gaining 6 feet. It was humiliating for one of the swiftest sailors in the American Navy. A stubborn anger seized the crew. The sailors abused the monster who, as before, disdained to answer them. The captain no longer contented himself with twisting his beard. He gnawed it. The engineer was again called. You have turned full steam in? Yes, sir, replied the engineer. The speed of the Abraham Lincoln increased. Its masts trembled down to their stepping holes, and the clouds of smoke could hardly find way out of the narrow funnels. They heaved the log a second time. Well, asked the captain of the men at the wheel. 19 miles and 3/10, sir. Clap on more steam. The engineer obeyed. The manometer showed 10 degrees, but the cetacean grew warm itself, no doubt. For without straining itself, it made 19 3/10 miles. What a pursuit! No, I cannot describe the emotion that vibrated through me. Ned Land kept his post, harpoon in hand. Several times the animal let us gain upon it. We shall catch it! We shall catch it! Cried the Canadian, but just as he was going to strike, the cetacean stole away with a rapidity that could not be estimated at less than 30 miles per hour. And even during our maximum of speed, it bullied the frigate, going round and round it. A cry of fury broke from everyone. At noon, we were no further advanced than at 8 o'clock in the morning. The captain then decided to take more direct means. Ah, he said, that animal goes quicker than the Abraham Lincoln. Very well. We shall see whether it will escape these conical bullets. Send your men to the forecastle, sir. The forecastle gun was immediately loaded and slewed round, but the shot passed some feet above the cetacean, which was half a mile off. Another! More to the right, cried the companion, and $5 to whoever will hit that infernal beast. An old gunner with a gray beard, that I could see now, with steady eye and grave face, went up to the gun and took a long aim. A long report was heard, with which were mingled the cheers of the crew. The bullet did its work. It hit the animal, but not fatally, and sliding off the rounded surface was lost in 2 miles of depths. The chase began again, and the captain, leaning towards me, said, I will pursue that beast till my frigate bursts up. Yes, answered I, and you will be quite right to do it. I wished the beast would exhaust itself and not be insensible to fatigue like a steam engine, but it was of no use. Hours passed without it showing any signs of exhaustion. However, it must be said in praise of the Abraham Lincoln that she struggled on indefatigably. I cannot reckon the distance she made, under 300 miles during this unlucky day, November the 6th. But night came on and overshadowed the rough ocean. Now I thought our expedition was at an end, and that we should never again see the extraordinary animal. I was mistaken. At 10 minutes to 11 in the evening, the electric light reappeared 3 miles to windward of the frigate, as pure, as intense as during the preceding night. The narwhal seemed motionless, perhaps tired with its day's work. It slept, letting itself float with the undulation of the waves. Now was a chance of which the captain resolved to take advantage. He gave his orders. The Abraham Lincoln kept up half steam and advanced cautiously so as not to wake its adversary. It was no rare thing to meet in the middle of the ocean whales so sound asleep that they could be successfully attacked, and Ned Land had harpooned more than one during its sleep. The Canadian went to take his place again under the bowsprit. The frigate approached noiselessly, stopped at 2 cables' lengths from the animal, and following its track. No one breathed. A deep silence reigned on the bridge. We were not 100 feet from its burning focus, the light of which increased and dazzled our lives. At this moment, leaning on the forecastle bulwark, I saw below me Ned Land grappling the martingale in one hand, brandishing his terrible harpoon in the other, scarcely 20 feet from the motionless animal. Suddenly his arm straightened, and the harpoon was thrown. I heard the sonorous stroke of the weapon, which seemed to have struck a hard body. The electric light went out suddenly, and 2 enormous waterspouts broke over the bridge of the frigate, rushing like a torrent from stern to stern, overthrowing men and breaking the lashings of the spars. A fearful shock followed, and, thrown over the rail without having time to stop myself, I fell into the sea. End of chapter 6. Chapter 7. An Unknown Species of Whale. This unexpected fall so stunned me that I have no clear recollection of my sensations at the time. I was at first drawn down to a depth of about 20 feet. I'm a good swimmer, though without pretending to rival Byron or Edgar Poe, who were masters of the art. And in that plunge I did not lose my presence of mind. 2 vigorous strokes brought me to the surface of the water. My first care was to look for the frigate. Had the crew seen me disappear? Had the Abraham Lincoln veered round? Would the captain put out a boat? Might I hope to be saved? The darkness was intense. I caught a glimpse of a black mass disappearing in the east, its beacon lights dying out in the distance. It was the frigate! I was lost. Help! Help! I shouted, swimming towards the Abraham Lincoln in desperation. My clothes encumbered me. They seemed glued to my body and paralyzed my movements. I was sinking. I was suffocating. Help! This was my last cry. My mouth filled with water. I struggled against being drawn down into the abyss. Suddenly my clothes were seized by a strong hand, and I felt myself quickly drawn to the surface of the sea, and I heard these words pronounced in my ear. If master would be so good as to lean upon my shoulder, master would swim with much greater ease. I seized with one hand my faithful Conseil's arm. Is it you? Said I. You? Myself, answered Conseil, and awaiting master's orders. That shark threw you as well into the sea? No, but being in my master's service, I followed him. The worthy fellow thought that was but natural. And the frigate? I asked. The frigate? Replied Conseil, turning on his back. I think that master had better not count too much on her. You think so? I say that at the time I threw myself into the sea, I heard men at the wheel say, the screw and the rudder are broken. Broken? Yes, broken by the monster's teeth. It's the only injury the Abraham Lincoln has sustained, but it's a bad look for us. She no longer answers her helm. Then we are lost. Perhaps so, calmly answered Conseil. However, we still have several hours before us, and one could do a good deal in some hours. Conseil's imperturbable coolness set me up again. I swam more vigorously, but cramped by my clothes, which struck to me like a leaden weight, I felt great difficulty in bearing up. Conseil saw this. Will master let me make a slit? Said he, and slipping an open knife under my clothes, he ripped them from top to bottom very rapidly. Then he cleverly slipped them off me while I swam for both of us. Then I did the same for Conseil, and we continued to swim near to each other. Sunder, the only one to manage to stay afloat in that, pardon the pun, in that race. 98 points. Next race, play to play. Get him on, get him in, get him in, get him on. Balls on the track, balls on the track, exclamation point play to get your marbles into the race. Get him on, get him in, get him in, get him on. Sunder, you won. Get him in, get him in, get him in. I'm going to put 3 minutes on the clock. So they've been thrown over the boat. Well, Professor Pierre Ahana was thrown over the boat. Conseil, being a loyal manservant, jumped right in after him. The clothes were cramping them, so Conseil slit the clothes. I mean, if you've ever had to swim in full clothes, which for life saving in Boy Scouts I've had to do before, they train you how to like get your shoes off is like number one. Like number one thing if you fall in is get your shoes off. And number two is try to like take off your pants and close and tie them and close them and use them as like a flotation. But in this case, in the middle of the ocean, just cut them off. Let's get going. Let's get swimming. So they cut. Conseil cuts Arhona's clothes. He cuts Conseil's. They're a little more free, and they've got perhaps a better chance of surviving, getting somewhere in the middle of this freaking ocean. It's harrowing, right? It's tough. Let's run this battle early, just so we can do both of these things at once. So they are up a creek without a paddle. Up a creek without a paddle, to say the least. And where we sit, we're going to read for probably about 30 more minutes, but I feel like we're making really good progress. Yeah, really good progress. And judging by this, it's probably going to be another 4-banger. It's probably going to be about 4 weeks of reading. Forgot how short the chapters were. I mean, you say that, but like, you know, we're only 6.5 chapters in, and we've been reading for an hour and a half. Woods, Milkman, Kriznatch, and Lone Hermit. Get the bone-eye. We got 2 loyalty chests in a row, silver and skin, and then we're going to have 1 in between before our boss battle. Everybody enjoying the book so far? All right. get back to it. I like that I had to make the tiebreaker, and I chose this one both because Romana voted for it, and she was really torn between two books, and I made her choose. So I went with her choice, but also because this was one of the one-off books. Though there are more Jules Verne books and another with a character from this book. But, we have the freedom to go somewhere else. Whereas if we did, say, Study in Scarlet, we would then have to decide, do we come back to Sherlock Holmes later? Or do we keep on with Sherlock Holmes, Yeah. So we have the ability here to just call this one quits after we do it and move on to something new. Now we can, like I said, come back to Jules Verne later on. He's got a few good books, and like I said, one more with the character in this book. All right, let's get back to it. By the way, Annie, is Burrito celebrating? Did it actually happen? I'll have to go ask him later. Okay, let's get back to it. Nevertheless, our situation was no less terrible. Perhaps our disappearance had not been noticed, and if it had been, the frigate could not tack, being without its helm. Conseil argued on this supposition and laid his plans accordingly. The phlegmatic boy was perfectly self-possessed. We then decided that, as our only chance of safety was being picked up by the Abraham Lincoln's boats, we ought to manage so as to wait for them as long as possible. I resolved then to husband our strength, so that both should not be exhausted at the same time, and this is how we managed. While one of us lay on our back quite still, with arms crossed and legs stretched out, the other would swim and push the other on in front. This towing business did not last more than 10 minutes each, and relieving each other thus, we could swim on for some hours, perhaps till daybreak. Poor chance! But hope is so firmly rooted in the heart of man. Moreover, there were two of us. Indeed, I declare, though it may seem improbable, if I sought to destroy all hope, if I wished to despair, I could not. The collision of the frigate with the cetacean had occurred about 11 o'clock the evening before. I reckoned then that we should have 8 hours to swim before sunrise, and operation quite practicable if we relieved each other. The sea, very calm, was in our favor. Sometimes I tried to pierce the intense darkness that was only dispelled by the phosphorescence caused by our movements. I watched the luminous waves that broke over my hand, whose mirror-like surface was spotted with silvery rings. One might have said that we were in a bath of quicksilver. Near 1 o'clock in the morning, I was seized with dreadful fatigue. My limbs stiffened under the strain of violent cramp. Conseil was obliged to keep me up, and our preservation devolved on him alone. I heard the poor boy pant. His breathing became short and hurried. I found he could not keep up much longer. "Leave me! Leave me!" I said to him. "Leave my master? Never," replied he. "I would drown first." Just then the moon appeared through the fringes of a thick cloud that the wind was driving to the east. The surface of the sea glittered with its rays. This kindly light reanimated us. My head got better again, and I looked at all points of the horizon. I saw the frigate. She was 5 miles from us and looked like a dark mass hardly discernible, but no boats. I would have cried out, but what good would it have been at such a distance? My swollen lips could utter no sounds. Conseil could articulate some words, and I heard him repeat at intervals, "Help! Help!" Our movements were suspended for an instant. We listened. It might be only a singing in the ear, but it seemed to me as if a cry answered the cry from Conseil. "Did you hear?" I murmured. "Yes, yes." And Conseil gave one more despairing call. This time there was no mistake. A human voice responded to ours. Was it the voice of another unfortunate creature, abandoned in the middle of the ocean, some other victim of the shock sustained by the vessel? Or rather, was it a boat from the frigate that was hailing us in the darkness? Conseil made a last effort, and leaning on my shoulder while I was struck out in a despairing effort, he raised himself half out of the water and then fell back exhausted. "What did you see?" I saw, but do not talk. Reserve all your strength." What had he seen? Then, I know not why, the thought of the monster came into my head for the first time, but that voice! The time has passed for Jonas to take refuge in whales' bellies. However, Conseil was towing me again. He raised his head sometimes, looked before us, and uttered a cry of recognition, which was responded to by a voice that came nearer and nearer. I scarcely heard it. My strength was exhausted, my fingers stiffened, my hand afforded me support no longer. My mouth, convulsively opening, filled with seawater. Cold crept over me, and I raised my head for the last time, and then I sank. At this moment, a hard body struck me. I clung to it, and then I felt that I was being drawn up, and I was brought to the surface of the water, and my chest collapsed. I fainted. It is certain that I soon came to, thanks to the vigorous rubbings that I received. I half opened my eyes. "Conseil," I murmured. "Does master call me?" asked Conseil. Just then, by the waning light of the moon, which was sinking down to the horizon, I saw a face which was not Conseil's, and which I immediately recognized. "Ned!" I cried. "The same, sir. And who is seeking this prize?" replied the Canadian. "Were you thrown into the sea by the shock of the frigate?" "Yes, Professor, but more fortunate than you. I was able to find a footing almost directly upon a floating island." "An island?" "Or more correctly speaking, on our gigantic Naiwar." "Explain yourself, Ned." "Only I soon find out why my harpoon had not entered its skin and was blunted." "Why, Ned, why?" "Because, Professor, the beast is made of sheet iron." The Canadian's last words produced a sudden revolution in my brain. I wriggled myself quickly to the top of the being or object, half out of the water, which served us for a refuge. I kicked it. It was evidently a hard, impenetrable body, and not the soft substance that forms the bodies of the great marine mammalia. But this hard body might be a bony carapace, like that of the antediluvian animals, and I should be free to class this monster among amphibious reptiles such as tortoises or alligators. Well, no. The blackish back that supported me was smooth, polished, without scales. The blow produced a metallic sound, and incredible though it may be, it seemed, I might say, as if it was made of riveted plates. There was no doubt about it. This monster, this natural phenomena that had puzzled the learned world and overthrown and misled the imagination of seamen of both hemispheres, it must be owned, a still more astonishing phenomena, inasmuch as it was simply human construction. We had no time to lose, however. We were lying upon the back of a sort of submarine boat which appeared, as far as I could judge, like a huge fish of steel. Ned Land's mind was made up on the point. Conseil and I could only agree with him. Just then a bubbling began at the back of the strange thing, which was evidently propelled by a screw, and it began to move. We had only just time to seize hold of the upper part, which rose about 7 feet out of the water, and happily its speed was not great. "As long as it sails horizontally," muttered Ned Land, "I do not mind, but if it takes a fancy to dive, I would not give 2 straws for my life." The Canadian might have said still less. It became really necessary to communicate with the beings, whatever they were, shut up inside the machine. I searched all over the outside for an aperture, a panel, or a manhole, to use a technical expression, but the line of the iron rivets solidly driven into the joints of the iron plates were clear and uniform. Besides, the moon disappeared then and left us in total darkness. At last, this long night passed. My indistinct remembrance provides me describing all the impressions that it made. I could only recall one circumstance. During some lulls of the wind and sea, I fancied I heard several times vague sounds, a sort of fugitive harmony produced by words of command, what was then the mystery of this submarine craft, of which the whole world vainly sought an explanation? What kind of beings existed in this strange boat? What mechanical agent caused its prodigious speed? Daybreak appeared. The morning mists surrounded us, but they soon cleared off. I was about to examine the hull, which formed on deck a kind of horizontal platform, when I felt it gradually sinking. "Ah, confound it!" cried Ned Land, kicking the resounding plate. "Open, you inhospitable rascals!" Happily, the sinking movement stopped. Suddenly, a noise like ironworks violently pushed aside and came from the interior of the boat. One iron plate was moved. A man appeared, uttered an odd cry, and disappeared immediately. Some moments later, 8 strong men with masked faces appeared noiselessly and drew us down into their formidable machine. End of chapter 7. Chapter 8. Mobilis in Mobili. This forcible abduction, so roughly carried out, was accomplished with the rapidity of lightning. I shivered all over. Whom had we to deal with? No doubt some new sort of pirates who explored the sea in their own way. Hardly had the narrow panel closed upon me when I was enveloped in darkness. My eyes, dazzled with the outer light, could distinguish nothing. I felt my naked feet cling to the rungs of an iron ladder. Ned Land and Conseil, firmly seized, followed me. At the bottom of the ladder, a door opened and shut after us immediately with a bang. We were alone. Where, I could not say, hardly imagine. All was black, and such a dense black that after some minutes my eyes had not been able to discern even the faintest glimmer. Meanwhile, Ned Land, furious at these proceedings, gave free vent to his indignation. "Confound it!" cried he. "Here are people who come up to the Scotch for hospitality. The only just miss being cannibals. I should not be surprised at it, but I declare that I shall not eat me without my protesting." "Calm yourself, friend Ned, calm yourself," replied Conseil quietly. "Do not cry out before you are hurt. We're not quite done for yet." "Not quite," sharply replied the Canadian, "but pretty near, at all events. Things look black. Happily my bowie knife I have still, and I can always see well enough to use it. The first of these pirates who lays a hand on me, do not excite yourself, Ned," I said to the harpooner, "and do not compromise us by useless violence. Who knows that they will not listen to us? Let us rather try to find out where we are." I groped about. In 5 steps I came to an iron wall made of plates bolted together. Then, turning back, I struck against a wooden table, near which were several ranged stools. The boards of this prison were concealed under a thick mat of phorium, which deadened the noise of the feet. The bare walls revealed no trace of window or door. Conseil, going round the reverse way, met me, and we met back to the middle of the cabin, which measured about 20 feet by 10. As to its height, Ned Land, in spite of his own great height, could not measure it. Half an hour had already passed without our situation being bettered, when the dense darkness suddenly gave way to extreme light. Our prison was suddenly lighted. That is to say, it became filled with a luminous matter, so strong I could not bear it at first. In its whiteness intensity, I recognized that electric light which played round the submarine boat like a magnificent phenomena of phosphorescence. After shutting my eyes involuntarily, I opened them and saw that this luminous agent came from a half-globe, unpolished, placed in the room of the cabin. "At last one can see," cried Ned Land, who, knife in hand, stood on the defensive. "Yes," said I, but we are still in the dark about ourselves. Let master have patience, said the imperturbable Conseil. The sudden lighting of the cabin enabled me to examine it minutely. It only contained a table and 5 stools. The invisible door might be hermetically sealed. No noise was heard. All seemed dead in the interior of this boat. Did it move? Did it float on the surface of the ocean? Or did it dive into the depths? I could not guess. A noise of bolts was now heard, and the door opened and 2 men appeared. One was short, very muscular, broad shoulders, with robust limbs, strong head, an abundance of black hair, thick mustache, a quick penetrating look, and the vivacity which characterizes the population of southern France. The second stranger merits a more detailed description. A disciple of Grécholet or Ingel would have read his face like an open book. I made out his prevailing qualities directly: self-confidence, because his head was well set on his shoulders, and his black eyes looked around with cold assurance. Calmness, for his skin, rather pale, showed his coolness of blood. Energy, evinced by the rapid contraction of his lofty brows, and courage, because his deep breathing denoted great power of lungs. Whether this person was 35 or 50 years of age, I could not say. He was tall, had a large forehead, straight nose, a clearly cut mouth, beautiful teeth with fine taper hands indicative of a highly nervous temperament. This man was certainly the most admirable specimen I had ever met. One particular feature was his eyes, rather far from each other, and which could take in nearly a quarter of the horizon at once. This faculty, I verified it later, gave him a range of vision far superior to Ned Land's. When the stranger fixed upon an object, his eyebrows met, his large eyelids closed around so as to contract the range of his vision, and he looked as if he magnified the objects lessened by distance, as if he pierced those sheets of water so opaque to our eyes, as if he read the very depths of the seas. The 2 strangers, with caps made from the fur of the sea otter, and shod with sea boots of seal skin, were dressed in clothes of a particular texture which allowed free movements of the limbs. The taller of the 2, evidently the chief on board, examined us with great attention without saying a word. Then, turning to his companion, talked with him in an unknown tongue. It was sonorous, harmonious, and a flexible dialect, the vowels seeming to admit of a very varied accentuation. The other replied with a shake of the head and added 2 or 3 perfectly incomprehensible words. Then he seemed to question me by a look. I replied in good French that I did not know his language, but he seemed not to understand me, and my situation became more embarrassing. "If master were to tell our story," said Conseil, "perhaps these gentlemen may understand your words." I began to tell our adventures, articulating each syllable clearly, and without omitting one single detail. I announced our names and rank, introducing in person Professor Arhana, his servant Conseil, and Master Ned Land, the harpooner. The man with the soft, calm eyes listened to me quietly, even politely, and with extreme attention, but nothing in his countenance indicated that he had understood my story. When I finished, he had said not a word. There remained one resource: to speak English. Perhaps they would know this almost universal language. I knew it, as well as the German language, well enough to read it fluently, but not to speak it correctly. But anyhow, we must make ourselves understood. "Go on in your turn," I said to the harpooner. "Speak your best Anglo-Saxon and try to do better than I." Ned did not beg off, and recommenced our story. To his great disgust, the harpooner did not seem to have made himself more intelligible than I had. Our visitors did not stir. They evidently understood neither the language of Arago nor of Faraday. Very much embarrassed, and having vainly exhausted our speaking resources, I knew not what part to take when Conseil said, "If master will permit me, I will relate it in German." But in spite of the elegant terms and good accent of the narrator, the German language had no success. At last, nonplussed, I tried to remember my first lessons and to narrate our adventures in Latin, but with no better success. This last attempt being of no avail, the 2 strangers exchanged some words in their unknown language and retired. The door shut. "It is an infamous shame," cried Ned Land, who broke out for the 20th time. We speak to these rogues in French, English, German, Latin, and not one of them has politeness to answer. Calm yourself, I said to the imperious Ned. Your anger will do no good. But do you see, Professor, replied our irascible companion, that we shall absolutely die of hunger in this iron cage? Bah, said Conseil philosophically. We can hold out some time yet. My friends, I said, we must not despair. We have been worse off than this. Do me the favor to wait a little before forming an opinion upon the commander and crew of this boat. My opinion is formed, replied Ned Land sharply. They are rascals. Good. And from what country? From the land of rogues. My brave Ned, that country is not clearly indicated on the map of the world, but I admit that the nationality of two strangers is hard to determine. English, neither French nor German, that is quite certain. However, I am inclined to think that the commander and his companion were born in low latitudes. There is southern blood in them, but I cannot decide by their appearance whether they are Spaniards, Turks, Arabians, or Indians. As to the language, it's quite incomprehensible. There is the disadvantage of not knowing all languages, said Conseil, or the advantage of not having one universal language. As he said these words, the door opened. A steward entered. He brought us clothes, coats, and trousers made of stuff I did not know. I hastened to dress myself, and my companions followed my example. During that time, the steward, dumb, perhaps deaf, had arranged the table and laid 3 plates. This is something like, said Conseil. Bah, said the rancorous harpooner. What do you suppose they eat here? Tortoise liver? Filleted shark? Beef steaks from sea dogs? We shall see, said Conseil. The dishes of bell metal were placed on the table, and we took our places. Undoubtedly, we had to do with civilized people, and had it not been for the electric light which flooded us, I could have fancied I was in the dining room of the Adelphi Hotel at Liverpool or the Grand Hotel in Paris. I must say, however, that there was neither bread nor wine. The water was fresh and clear, but it was water, and did not suit Ned Land's taste. Amongst the dishes which were brought to us, I recognized several fish delicately dressed, but of some, although excellent, I could give no opinion. Neither could I tell to what kingdom they belonged, whether animal or vegetable. As to the dinner service, it was elegant and in perfect taste. Each utensil, spoon, fork, knife, plate had a letter engraved on it, with a motto above it, and of which this was an exact facsimile. Mobili and Mobili, N. The letter N was no doubt the initial of the name of the enigmatical person who commanded at the bottom of the sea. Ned and Conseil did not reflect much. They devoured the food, and I did likewise. I was, besides, reassured as to our fate, and it seemed evident that our hosts would not let us die of want. However, everything has an end. Everything passes away, even the hunger of people who have not eaten for 15 hours. Our appetites satisfied, we felt overcome with sleep. Faith, I shall sleep well, said Conseil. So shall I, replied Ned Land. My 2 companions stretched themselves on the cabin carpet and were soon sound asleep. For my own part, too many thoughts crowded my brain. Too many insoluble questions pressed upon me. Too many fancies kept my eyes open. Where were we? What strange power carried us on? I felt, or rather fancied I felt, the machine sinking down to the lowest beds of the sea. Dreadful nightmares beset me. I saw, in those mysterious asylums, a world of unknown animals, amongst which this submarine boat seemed to be of the same kind, living, moving, and formidable as they. Then my brain grew calmer. My imagination wandered into vague unconsciousness, and I soon fell into a deep sleep. End of chapter 8.